Welcome back to part 3 of our cancelled movie report on Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. So far, in part 1, we've learnt about the research that Kubrick did for this project and the burning passion that he held.
What he really wanted to make was a film about Napoleon, because Napoleon was someone he revered.
Stanley Kubrick's next film for MGM will be Napoleon. Mr. Kubrick will write, produce and direct the 70mm colour film on the life of Bonaparte.
We even learnt my deep dark secret that I have never seen Barry Lyndon, the Kubrick film that a lot of this research ended up going into. Then in part 2, we went through the screenplay bit by bit to hear what the story of Kubrick's Napoleon would have been.
Oh, shut up, will you? Your tears have absolutely no effect on me. I must be free of this sordid jealousy. Men of the Fifth, will you join me?
Now here, in part 3, we want to find out what happened. We're going to dive into the studio politics behind everything and hear a story about how the screenplay was rediscovered in the 90s.
Years ago, Stanley had a contract with MGM UA to write a screenplay for Napoleon. I have never been able to read it. Let's dig it up and take a look at it and see what it's like.
So without any further ado, let's finally find out what happened to Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. Well, you're probably wondering, he did so much. What happened?
Kemba, why didn't this they were already there. They could see the goalpost, Kemba.
There are a couple of things. I want you to guess the first one.
Budget?
Budget! Well done.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yes, Kubrick's vision of the film was obviously enormous in scale. There are scenes in Marie Antoinette's palace. There are scenes in Notre Dame. The budget was a big concern. Required extensive resources. He planned to use tens of thousands of extras. So the level of detail and the sheer size, it was looking to be incredibly expensive.
Napoleon would have been a very, very typical Kubrick film.
Here once again is Kubrick's brother-in-law and producer, Jan Harlan.
His downfall was self-inflicted. Now, he was a man who was enormously gifted for his job, colossally successful, from a small officer who came from a foreign country, namely from Corsica, and was trained in the south of France. He crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. Now, this is just quite astonishing. And this man, however, in the end, was governed by his emotions more than by his intellect. And this is an old story of Stanley. This is this conflict between emotion and intellect.
I told you that MGM last episode was going to be important.
Yes, you did. You did say that.
In 1969, businessman Kirk Kerkorian brought a significant stake in MGM. And he dramatically shifted the studio's operations and direction. His management strategy included slashing staff and production costs, which led to the studios producing fewer and lower budget and lower quality films, because his focus was not on filmmaking, but leveraging the MGM brand for casinos.
Oh, what, in Vegas, the MGM casino?
The MGM Grand. And MGM invested a lot in hospitality and casinos through the 70s.
No way.
The new owners of MGM acquired the studio around the time that Kubrick was developing this project. And they were like, absolutely not.
No, it's not. That does not look like a casino to me.
Here's former Warner Brothers executive John Calley on why he thinks it didn't get made.
Then the question, of course, arose, well, why didn't Stanley just do it? It's public domain, for Christ's sakes. It's Napoleon. So MGM can't own Napoleon. But he could never do it again, because if he tried to do it at Warner's, for example, MGM would come after Warner's and Stanley and say, hey, wait a minute. You're infringing upon our story. And we'd say, no, this is another screenplay that Stanley wrote. And they'd say, yeah, but Napoleon's Napoleon. You can't get the guy to do it twice. And there would be no way, because his concept was so brilliant and so much a part of his enthusiasm for doing it, that he could not do another version that would be satisfactory to him. So it just languished there.
However, when I spoke to Alison Castle, she had a different opinion.
Yeah, well, it's true that he knew that MGM was going to try to have a say over the intellectual property. And he actually wrote up a proposal to do the film after Clockwork Orange was done, before Barry Lyndon. And he put on the budget the cost of paying off MGM. So he understood that there was going to have to be a negotiation there, and he probably thought that they could just come to an agreement over that. But I have to say that if MGM was just saying the idea of a Stanley Kubrick Napoleon, and that was enough to get the project canceled for any other filmmaker, that's not super realistic. And even if they're saying, we have the script, you wrote it for us, he had so much research material, he could have written another script. A really important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this, there were bundles of the drafts of the script, so many. And if the treatment that he wrote before it, the treatment is much more complete. There's a lot more things in the treatment than there are in the script.
This is how bad the MGM situation got. In an effort to raise funds, MGM held a massive auction in 1970 where they sold off all their props and costumes and other assets from their storied history. The auction symbolized the end of an era of MGM and highlighted the studio's financial desperation. Iconic items such as Judy Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz were sold to collections, signaling the dismantling of the studio's legacy.
Do you know what's funny? Do you know what's funny? They mentioned his big film was 2001. Kubrick had made Spartacus, which is like Kirk Douglas, Spartacus. Like that's a big historical epic.
Big hit.
Yeah, big hit.
So that happened in 1969. MGM was taken over and decided to focus more on casinos. And then in 1970, they sold off a bunch of their film production stuff. Also in 1970, a film releases called Waterloo.
But the problem was that this went on too long, and some other people had the idea of doing films about Napoleon.
The film was pulled by MGM because the Rod Steiger movie, Waterloo, not a bad film at all, was not really as successful as the studios had hoped, and MGM then didn't want to proceed, and the film wasn't green-lighted. We had an enormous amount of pre-production cost already in it, but not the rest. And so Stanley was very, very disappointed. He was really quite depressed for a few days, but, life has to go on.
And this failure made any studio wary of financing another Napoleon-centered historical epic so soon after this, leading to even further hesitations and ultimately the cancellation of Kubrick's Napoleon. For years, this project became a bit of a myth. Because remember, obviously, this is pre-internet, this is pre-gossip industry magazines. There was just myth about this project. And a lot of the documentation, a lot of the artworks, a lot of the planning has been discovered now, but it was kind of lost to time. And there was kind of whispers about what had happened. And no one had even really read this screenplay. And this screenplay was uncovered in a really unlikely place. And all of my research led me to someone I didn't expect and a conversation that I didn't expect. Hello, how are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for talking to me.
No, of course. Happy to do so.
This is Jeff Kleeman. In 2023, he became the CEO of Bold Films after already having run Alan DeGeneres' A Very Good Production. I think, I'm going to say it's like 2014. I've got this weird memory of production logos before movies. Like I have a quite good recall of them. And
that's amazing given how many there are.
I know. But I think it was around 2014. You might know better than me. But I feel like I saw Whiplash and Nightcrawler almost back to back. Now it's become one of the logos that when I see it before a movie, I do a little fist bump. I'm like, yeah, I'm safe. It's Bold Films.
Oh, that's great.
People might be thinking, Cambo, you've been talking about what happened to this project. And this is a weird tangent that you've gone on. So I wonder if you can explain to us why all of my research about the Kubrick archive and what happened leads to you, Jeff, and why it involves a gas mask.
In 1993, I didn't know John Calley, but I knew of John Calley. John had been this legendary executive, well, first producer and then executive in Hollywood. But he was coming out of retirement to take over what was going to be the new version of United Artists. MGM and United Artists have been batted around Hollywood like a pinball. But now a French company called Credit Lyonnais had purchased MGM and United Artists together. However, because of American banking laws, they had to sell them by 1997. We're in 1993 now, so in 4 years. So I went in and I met with John. And John fast became one of the most important people in my Hollywood existence. John had remained really close friends with Stanley Kubrick. And John knew that I was not just a big cinephile, but in particular a Kubrick fan. So John gave me the privilege of listening into his phone conversations with Stanley Kubrick. John would call me into his office. He'd put it on the speakerphone so I could listen in. And Kubrick was amazing. Early on at United Artists, John called me into his office and said, look, years ago, decades ago, Stanley had a contract with MGM UA to write a screenplay for Napoleon. And I have never been able to read it, but now that we're here, let's dig it up and take a look at it and see what it's like. So I went into the story department and went searching for it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. There was no indication it ever existed. So John called Kubrick. And again, I got to listen in on this conversation. John called Kubrick. He said, Stanley, I've got this young man here. I sent him searching for a Napoleon script and he couldn't find it. Can you please send me a copy of it? And Kubrick burst out laughing. And he said,
John, the reason he couldn't find it is that it doesn't exist. I made a deal for it, but I never wrote it. I never even wrote a page. That's why your guy came up with 0.
So John and I thought that was the end of it. That, Napoleon was a myth. It was a business deal that never resulted in a screenplay, which is not an infrequent occurrence in Hollywood. Some months later, it came to light that there were 44,000 uncatalogued, unindexed boxes of United Artists archives in a salt mine in Hutchinson, Kansas. Now, at least for me, this struck me as strange, but it made perfect sense as soon as it was explained. Because if you have something like a salt mine, what you're essentially in the business of doing when you mine it is creating empty space. And this mine had been in existence for decades and had thus created a lot of empty space. This particular mine was 56 stories beneath the surface of the earth. The only way in and out was through the mine shaft. So it was very secure. It had constant temperature, humidity. There was no fluctuation there. And theoretically, it was safe from even a direct nuclear attack. So what the mining company had done, and I believe other mining companies do, is very inexpensively, it rent out space to people who wanted, or corporations that want to store massive amounts that they didn't need to access with any kind of frequency. And at some point, as United Artists was being pinballed back and forth, all of its archives were packed up because it lost, and as you may know, the MGM lot disappeared, and there were times when there was no real office space or anything in terms of the MGM or UA were occupying. So at some point, whoever currently owned it thought, let's save some money, throw all this stuff in a bunch of boxes and ship it down to Hutchinson, Kansas, which has only 2 things, prisons and salt mines, and sell it for cheap. So it was decided that 7 of us would go to this mine. And we were a mix of folks. There were some people from legal who were looking for any legal documents that we needed, and also planning to destroy any legal documents that were no longer appropriate for us to have. Mm-hmm. This was at the time when home video, as in videotapes and DVDs, was really taking off, and laser discs, and they often required a lot of artwork. So there was a person from the home video department who was going to see if there was any materials that could be useful when we re-released United Artists movies.
Right.
And there was me. I was the sole person on the creative side, on the development and production side, who was going to see if there was anything there that might be of use in terms of making future films.
Right.
We got to Hutchinson, Kansas. We were equipped with gas masks, which were mandatory for us to carry at all times, and I guess construction helmets. And the way the mine worked is, as I mentioned earlier, you could only enter or exit through the mine shaft.
Yeah.
So you could only enter or exit twice a day. Twice a day, they would rig up it was like a wooden box that was essentially an elevator that they would lower the new crew of miners and us down into.
So once you were down there, you were down there for 12 hours.
Once you were down there for 12 hours, and you were totally cut off from the world.
Did you ever have a moment going down the rickety wooden box into the mine thinking, what am I doing?
Oh, the rickety wooden box freaked people out, particularly the first minute. It was a whole world down there. While the ceilings were low, and at times the walls were tight, depending on what mining had been done, there were also vast areas that were empty. And the miners, to keep themselves amused, had done things like take a 1950s car down part by part and rebuilt it. And they would drive it down the mine shaft 56 stories beneath the surface of the earth. So we started going through boxes. And we had no idea, when you open each box, we had no idea what we'd find. I found all the canceled checks for Heaven's Gate, which was a movie that had essentially bankrupted United Artists.
Yeah. The infamous Michael
Cimino.
Cimino. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I found box after box of scripts. And I would look through them, and some were fascinating. There was a script that Harold Pinter and Samuel Beckett had written together.
Wow.
There were unproduced Woody Allen screenplays. There was, if you are a movie buff, just a treasure trove of writers you've heard of and movies you may have at one point heard were in the works but never quite got made. A lot of those drafts were down.
Wow.
Now, you know where this is going because this is what we're talking about right now. But in the moment, I, of course, had no even hope of finding Napoleon. As far as I knew, Napoleon,
you weren't looking.
I wasn't looking for it. I wouldn't have even imagined it was there. John and I fully believed Stanley, who had, from his bursting into laughing on, had been utterly convincing about Napoleon's lack of existence. And I think it was on the second day, maybe it was on the third day, I started unpacking a box of scripts, and I come across the scripts with a blue cover, and it's a cover that even has a cutout on it, so you could see through to the title page beneath, and it says Napoleon. And I open it up, and it's Napoleon by Stanley Kubrick. I probably screamed. All the other folks down there with immediately stopped what they were doing because they knew something was up and came running over. And I did my best to explain to them how amazing it was. So they started taking pictures of me with it. But that was kind of where it ended because I desperately wanted to immediately tell John Calley.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I was trapped out there with this and no way to tell him about it. As soon as we got back to the motel we were staying in that night, I immediately called him on the motel phone, and told him what I'd found. And he said,
"Is there a fax machine?"
And I said, yeah, but I was going to tell you, I mean, so it's much more than 120 pages to take a long while to fax to you. And he said,
No, I don't want you to fax it to me. I just want you to fax me the first page.
So I did. I went to the hotel office and they agreed to fax the first page. And they sent it to John. And I wish I could have been there for this call, but unfortunately I was. I only had to hear about it later. John took that first page and he refaxed it to Stanley Kubrick without any note, without anything.
Yeah, such a power move, isn't it?
It
it didn't exist, hey?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And Kubrick, from what I understand, called John immediately. And John said, look, Stanley, let's make this.
Yeah.
John hadn't read it yet, but it was Kubrick. And it was Napoleon. And Kubrick's response was one John didn't expect, which was Kubrick said,
"No, please, don't."
He actually said, please don't. He said,
"Legally, you have the right to do it, but please, I ask you not to do that."
And so John, who first and foremost was Kubrick's friend, said, all right, we won't. And we didn't.
Why do you think that he lied about the script? Because clearly he didn't want to make it anymore, but to lie about its existence is quite interesting.
Look, I do not know what was going on in his head. I have two guesses, which is I don't know his reasons for not wanting to make it or not wanting to have it made. But for some reason he didn't. And by lying about it, what he was doing at the time was sealing off the possibility that John and I were going to keep searching for it. Because he did know it was out there. He knew it existed, and he probably guessed that given that John was over at MGM UA and John being John, if John believed it was there to be found, he would have kept seeking it until he found it. And Kubrick preferred it not to be found.
During my discussion with Jeff, he took me through the Hollywood process and essentially outlined 3 possible reasons that this didn't go ahead. The first is that MGM blocked the project from moving ahead at another studio. That MGM, after deciding not to proceed with Napoleon, could have withheld the project from being picked up by another studio. This scenario would be very unusual because typically studios allow talent to shop around a project they've decided to pass on, especially to maintain good relationships. However, there could have been a specific undisclosed reason why MGM would hold on to the rights. It is also possible that Kubrick did approach other major studios like Warner Brothers, Paramount or Columbia to finance Napoleon, but they all passed and turned him down too. These rejections could have been due to financial concerns, comparisons with similar projects like Waterloo, or just doubts about commercial viability of such a large-scale historical film. And the third possibility is that Kubrick himself chose to step back from the project, perhaps due to personal reasons, timing, market conditions, or just a change in his creative vision. And given his meticulous nature, Kubrick might have just felt that it wasn't the right moment to pursue Napoleon. And what we do know all of those years later, when he was offered the chance to do it again, he said no.
A lot of this stuff is sort of reminiscent of a film that he did later on. Barry Lyndon? Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Barry Lyndon. Yeah, great film. I love Barry Lyndon. I felt bad lying to Eden, but it did make me wonder, how close can we get to Kubrick's Napoleon through some of his other films? And what the hell is Barry Lyndon?
The thing that does strike you is how much Barry Lyndon was to become, in a way, a summation of everything he was thinking in those days. This very hieratic form, this very slow, even, adult way of making films, this long looks at things, slow movements. You know, all that stuff that you can see in scraps in some of these other movies, it all comes together in Barry Lyndon.
How close do you think people will get to the Kubrick Napoleon experience by watching Barry Lyndon? How much of the work he did on Napoleon do you think bled into that?
I think visually, you can picture it would have been that sumptuous, the Napoleon that he was going to film, because not only did he use a lot of the visual references and painterly inspirations for Barry Lyndon as he would have done for Napoleon, the different, and there was also some battle scenes in Barry Lyndon, though they were kind of rinky-dink ones. They weren't the kind of serious battle scenes that would have been in Napoleon. But I think with that together with the choice of music, he liked to use period music as he did with 2001, and that was very, very rare. So yeah, again, it wouldn't have been the typical Hollywood, over dramatic score. He would have used music that was recognizable from the time.
With all the evidence stacked up, I thought it was finally time. I booked a ticket to the Astor Theatre here in Melbourne, and I finally sat down to watch Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon for the very first time. And now I've come clean to Eden, and I need to tell him all about it. Let me tell you this, Eden. I fucking loved it. I loved it so much. It is so good, Eden. I know that this film gets hyped up a lot, and I didn't know what to expect. I love this movie so much. It is not Napoleon. I will point that out right away. But the clear passion that he made Barry Lyndon with, like Barry Lyndon is just about a man that kind of bumbles from poverty into high society and into all this kind of stuff. And he's a scammer. He's a man obsessed, a classic Napoleon thing. It's a masterpiece, honestly. It's so great. Really? And I encourage, if you've enjoyed this episode of this podcast and you want a taste of what Napoleon could have looked like, I encourage everyone to go and watch Barry Lyndon. It's so great.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. That's really interesting. So do you think that if he had made Napoleon, it would have been Barry Lyndon, but better? Like it would have been the next level with that.
And I don't think he would have made Barry Lyndon.
No, obviously not. No.
And here's the thing, and you might even be experiencing this right now if you're looking at home and you've just Googled Barry Lyndon. All of the production stills look so boring. It's people in pompous outfits, standing in decadent rooms, chatting and whatnot. I know. But it's so good. I loved it so much.
Really? Okay, now I'm going to have to check it out, Cambo.
But as far as this project, there have been other people that has still wanted to adapt it. And Steven Spielberg actually announced some years ago that he actually plans on taking Kubrick's screenplay and he wants to make it into a prestige miniseries. And I believe Cary Fukuhara, the guy that directed, True Detective and stuff, he was attached as a director for this miniseries for Kubrick's Napoleon. That being said, it's now been several years and there's been no update about this series.
That's not a good sign, Kevin.
No, it's not a good sign.
Here's a little thought experiment for you.
Sure.
So you're Kubrick, right? You put all this passion, all this love, everything into Napoleon, and then it just gets like ripped away from you for all these reasons. And there's this rage inside you, yeah? There's this anger, and you just want to lash out at something. Do you think that this experience, Napoleon, is what led to his next film, A Clockwork Orange?
Clockwork Orange. Yeah, and possibly. There is some crossover with A Clockwork Orange. He was still working on drafts of A Clockwork Orange while he was trying to prep this. And maybe all of the anger and the frustration eventually bled over into The Shining. He's like, I want to take an axe to them. Yeah. I'm gonna have to go insane here. They're gonna have to lock me in a freezer.
Great. This is great. This is what I like. Weaving it all together, Cameron. Weaving it all together.
The question always has to come up. Would you want to see this movie?
Well, it sounds like you've already seen it, Cambo.
In a way. I would 100% love to see this.
Mate.
If for nothing else, for the scale. Like, he was clearly aiming big.
The moon cameras, the paper uniforms,
The paper uniform, the moon cameras. Whenever you see Lawrence of Arabia or Ben-Hur, there's genuinely, when they get to the huge scenes, you go, holy shit.
When it's real extras as well.
That's it. There is a chemical in your brain that gets unlocked when you can tell it's all real. And I think that this would have had similar huge scope scenes that you would have gone, holy shit, look at that.
Yeah. No, I think from what you've said in terms of like just pure passion coming into something, it cannot help to be good if there's that much passion and desire to get things over the line, I think.
Now, the ultimate cancellation, obviously, Kubrick passed away in 1999.
Did you just call death the ultimate cancellation?
The ultimate cancellation. But there's a great story I want to highlight because there was a reporter that went to Kubrick's home and they were doing a piece around Kubrick's legacy and things like this.
This is after his death.
Yeah, but not long after his death.
Yeah.
Citizen Kubrick, John Ronson, The Guardian, 2004. Tony takes me into a large room painted blue and filled with books. "This used to be the cinema," he says. "Is it the library now?" I ask. "Look closer at the books," says Tony. I do. "Bloody hell," I say. "Every book in this room is about Napoleon." "Look in the drawers," says Tony. I do. "It's all about Napoleon too," I say. "Everything in here is about Napoleon." I feel a little like Shelley Duvall in The Shining, chancing upon her husband's novel and finding it is comprised entirely of the line, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," typed over and over again.
It's
heartbreaking. It is. It's heartbreaking because he clearly didn't get over it.
No.
And then it's been memorialized in all kinds of ways. You can read the screenplay's made its way online. Obviously, the book that we used for research for this is the ultimate. You've got every bit of documentation. Everything you've heard narrated in this episode has come from this book. I love this project. I really do. I think it's genuinely great. I know this is a different style and a different tact for our show. Hopefully, people have enjoyed something a little bit different. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would like to see it, Campo. I think I would have been fully immersed in the Napoleon. I like a good historical epic, and I think anything at scale is really good. I like the jumping between large scale stuff and like very specific relationship, like one-on-one conversations. And I think jumping between the two, I think is quite good. I also like the idea, the more narrators, the better, Campo. That's what I say. Get some more in there, mate. Get some more.
We had narrator Napoleon. We had Josephine at one point.
Yeah.
Start like, the guy that jailed him at the end. Give him a narration.
Give him a bloody narration, mate. Give him all a narration. Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's a shame that and it's obviously haunted Kubrick to the day he died, Campo.
Do you think his last words are Napoleon?
Yeah.
At the beginning of this report, we talked about King Ludwig and his castle Neuschwanstein, something that he intended to build over his lifetime, but never saw it completed. Neuschwanstein has since been completed, after Ludwig's death, and open to the public for all to enjoy. And the further we got along this report, it made me realise that perhaps this isn't a one-to-one parallel with Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. In fact, perhaps a better parallel is the movie AI, Artificial Intelligence. This was a film originally developed by Stanley Kubrick, but he didn't see it completed within his lifetime. And it was finished by a friend and protege, Steven Spielberg. AI was released to the public on June 29th, 2001. So perhaps the fact that Kubrick's Napoleon has never come to light is what makes it so interesting, so special to Kubrick, and so wholly unique. Thank you so much for listening to this cancelled movie report on Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon. We hope you've enjoyed these episodes, and we hope you've enjoyed the change of format, and really we hope you've enjoyed this entire season. It's been our genuine pleasure to bring you these little movies, and we hope that you enjoy listening to them even half as much as we enjoy putting them together. A huge thank you to Jeff Kleeman for sitting down and talking to us and telling us the amazing story of how he rediscovered Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon script in that salt mine. And Alison, thank you so much for talking to us. It was a genuine pleasure. If people enjoy your work, what kind of things should they be checking out?
Well, I did some smaller books and individual films that are sort of like the size of a vinyl album, not too expensive, and they each come with a DVD of the film, which I know is a little bit out of date. Although, that said, with the cost of streaming these days, people are starting to rethink that maybe they do want to keep their DVDs. So it's those I did one on Barry Lyndon, so that's a really great way to have a deeper look into Barry Lyndon than we got to do in the Kubrick Archives book, and that'll give you also a nice idea of what Napoleon could have looked like.
Thank you again to Michael Hahn for providing the voice of Stanley Kubrick, and a special shout out to Jay Zeta, who read Citizen Kubrick for us. And lastly, a thank you to every single person on this report or another who has helped us out, lent a voice, or in some way just been of service. It is so appreciated. We love making this show, and we love the community that helps us. If you've enjoyed this report or any of the ones we've done this season, it would genuinely mean so much to us if you could subscribe or leave a review or anything at all. Things like that make all the difference to an indie podcast like ours. Also, if you're excited for next season and want some content in between, consider joining us over on Patreon. We've got a bunch of bonus stuff on there, including all the audio dramas for the films that we've created, a couple of bonus podcasts, episodes that are released early when the season hits. It's a lot of fun, and that is really how the show gets made. And if there's a movie you want us to cover next season, just let us know. You can always either send us an email at cancelledmovies@gmail.com, or you can fill out the form in the episode notes letting us know about a project that you want us to cover, and we might just give it the Cancelled Movie Report treatment. And thank you one more time to my co-host, Eden Porter.
Thank you very much for having me, Cambo.
My name is Michael Campbell, and I have hosted and edited this episode. And this show is completely funded by the amazing people that support us over on Patreon. But until next season, take care.